Kia ora, morena, good morning. Hopefully not too early for some of you. I don't know who of you has been out partying. I haven't. I'm just tired. I'm Melanie Langlotz. I'm the founder and CEO of Geo AR Games. And with me is Tyrone, our developer.
Hello.
And I don't know who of you in the room actually knows us. I know that the front row knows us very well. So we do ethical-minded, value-based impact games. We work a lot with government. In actual fact, 99% of our clients are government and universities. So our reputation is key to what we do. It is extremely important that everything we do is highly ethical and very compliant. And so just to give you a little bit of context why we're doing this talk. So last year in December, a few of us went to the Immersive Tech Week in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And at some stage, one of my colleagues dragged me into a panel talk and said, I think we should watch this, this sounds really interesting. And so when they started, we watched a very heated, very passionate discussion about security concerns around using VR XR headsets. And I was quite baffled about some of the things that I heard, and I realized that in New Zealand we're just a little bit too relaxed about our data and about our users. And I give you an example. One of our colleagues, mentioned to me, I've already been hacked 3 times, they already have my data, does it really matter? But the thing is that previously you might have been worried about your password. Now we're talking about a whole nother level of data theft. And that can not only harm your studio and potentially bring it completely to bankruptcy, but it also obviously impacts on your users, especially, VR headsets, we still know you're not supposed to give them to children, but fact is a lot of parents do hand them to children. So we're going to give you a little bit of things to think about as a studio, as a developer, as a parent. Maybe there are a couple of parents in here, but also maybe as users, maybe there's some stuff that you didn't know. So it'll be interesting to see how much of the topic you are already familiar with. The other thing is, so we're not experts on that topic by far, really not. But Tyrone and I, we've done a lot of research on the topic because we felt it is our responsibility as a studio. But we also wanted to bring the topic around VR XR security to New Zealand because we feel that this is a conversation we should be part of. We can't leave everything up to Europe. Europe has the highest privacy standard in terms of data. We can't just kind of leave it all up to Europe. It would be really nice if we could step up with a little bit of thought leadership. And so I'll share some of the thoughts that came through from Europe. Now, one of the key things that challenged my way of thinking in the panel talk in Rotterdam, was that they said to me, previously what we've known is that people are after your password, right? They're after your password. Well, that's no longer true. The new currency now is data currency. Everybody is after your data in order to create a profile of personas that they can then use in combination with AI to basically do identity theft. And this is another thing where I realized, so the user is now the input. The user is now providing the data, is providing the input. And so it's shifted. It's quite interesting when you think about, how your user is now providing very valuable data to some people who are very keen to get their hands on it, depending on what you're collecting. This is specifically interesting when you're looking at health data, when you're looking at biometrics, which Tyrone is going to talk a lot about. But it's also considering what sort of data are you collecting and how is that interesting to a party who would want to take advantage of your users? And what sort of risk are you putting your studio in by doing so? And is it a risk that you thought about at the beginning? Or were you just really gung-ho and saying, hey, this is cool technology, let's do it? I'll give you an example. Ever since 2012, I've been wanting to do an EEG game. We're now looking at actually developing an EEG game, and I'm now, since this talk, starting to think, what data are we collecting? Do we really want to take that risk? So I'm going to hand over to Tyrone to talk a little bit more about headsets.
Cool. So these are the main headsets that I'm sure all of you know of. You've got most of the market share will be taken up by these. There are some smaller ones like your big screen VR, but those are all generally connected to your PC to actually do anything. These are the standalones, which can collect a lot more information from you. You've got your Apple Vision Pro, which has your eye tracking, their optic ID, which was used for sign-in, as well as for tracking your eyes and matching it to the front panel there. So that means they now are constantly watching your eyes. So you've got your iris, they can get your pupil dilation, what you're looking at. The Meta Quest, the Pro version, has facial tracking. The other versions do not. So if you're using those, yay, they don't know what you look like as much. HTC Vive does have full body tracking when you've got the additional trackers that you can buy. So that's then, now they know how you move, how long your arms are, how long your legs are, everything about what your body is. And then Pico VR, main thing is it's ByteDance. If they get any of your information, it's kind of just straight away to the Chinese government if they wanted it. If you don't mind that, that's not really an issue for you. But in terms of what they collect, they're very similar to the Quest. It's mainly inside out looking, so it's whatever's in your room they can pick up, your hands, how your head moves, and any of the data collected from these is covered by the GDPR. It all counts as biometric information. That counts as your voice, which they all have microphones for your social games, so they can get your voice, your cadence, your height, your eyes for those that have got image or eye scanning on them. And in some cases, you could potentially try and stop these from tracking it if you play your games not online for single-player games. There was also brought up while we were at Rotterdam for the Tech Week that you can put a data stop on for some games. I believe it's as you as the developer can put it in, and it blocks a lot of the permissions so that your user is safer and that not as much information can be collected either by you or by a third-party plugin that you may be using that is collecting them without you realizing it. But they all track far more than you realize and probably want them to track. Pass on a bit for more of the legal implications.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one because now you're looking at what is the manufacturer responsible for and what are you responsible for? And so we understand that the manufacturer is collecting data with you or without you either way. And as we will see from some of the data breaches, some of them are not actually that responsible with the data. And there is a reoccurring case, especially with Meta, of data theft, and they pay a fine and then they move on. But it's not that easy for smaller studios. And so I just wanted to share when we started out, with geolocation AR-based games. And early on, we looked at insurance, and I remember the first insurance package that we paid in 2018, I want to say. We couldn't actually afford it the first few years because it was geolocation AR, and in the aftermath of Pokemon, we were sitting around $26,000 a year just for insurance. And that was because it was AR and because we were looking at North America. So insurance companies are now taking this really serious. And so if you are being caught having a breach, there are a couple of things that you need to consider. First of all, are you only releasing your game in New Zealand? Unlikely. Most of us will probably tick international and want to get as many players as possible. Maybe your studio is a little bit bigger and you say, no, we're targeting US, we've learned our lessons, we're not going anywhere else, we're focusing on that. But generally, your New Zealand Privacy Act is guiding you for New Zealand, but it's not guiding you for the rest of the world. So we're looking at cross-border data transfer, we're looking at breach notification. The most important thing that I want you guys to be aware of and take away, which most people don't know, you have 70 hours to report a data breach. If you do not do that, you will get a $10,000 fine, and then you will have to do compensation for the user damage that you have caused based on the data that has leaked and the severity of the data. So if that leads to identity theft, you could look at a massive court case, and that will potentially take you out of business. Let me just quickly check. Did I forget anything? Yeah, actually, I did mean to ask you what falls under biometric data.
So yeah, your biometric data is anything about you. So your iris, your eyes, your mouth, your voice, your height, your limb length, anything that could be used about you to identify you in any way. It is also kind of vague in at least the GDPR as to what they count as that. So they will probably expand it to anything they think might identify you in the future if something else can start tracking it.
Cool. Okay, so we see it already that GDPR is probably the one that you want to use as a guideline because Europe is the strictest on that front. If you are developing kids games like we used to, COPPA is your #1 rule. You have to follow and know COPPA rules by heart, and you have to understand the GDPR privacy laws. So we've got the fines in there that gives you a bit of an idea as to how high they can be. And so when we think about, the percentage of revenue that we might get from a game, 4% is actually quite a bit. Is that coming? Oops, can you make that away? I don't know how to get it. Hang on. Oh dear. Okay. So the key takeaway from some of this is basically you have to, not only do you have to comply, but you have to think about which boxes did I tick to publish and which countries did I tick to publish, because in the terms and conditions, you may or may not be aware of that, it says this is a jurisdiction in which you will be charged. So if you ticked the US, you will have to travel to the US in order to show up for the court case. It is not a matter for you, to be summoned to court somewhere here in Wellington or Auckland. That's not going to happen. You will have to travel there, and then, and that adds to the cost, obviously. So that also comes into insurance later on when we talk a little bit more about that.
Cool. So this is just a little brief kind of recommendations on what devices are for your end user good, or if you are yourself a user. So lower risk, mainly because as a reputation, Apple and HTC Vive don't have any major scandals that at least I'm aware of. If you do know them, let me know so I can trust them less. But they haven't had too many major scandals in terms of data loss, and with anything that they have been tracking. HTC Vive, to my knowledge, doesn't really act as much of like a data broker. So from the end user point, they're pretty good. As a studio, trying to target something like the Apple Vision Pro is probably not a great idea. There's maybe 5 people in the country that have one, and globally you're just not going to have much of a market. Your Quest is kind of the standard everyone has. It's cheap, it's easy entry, it has a ton of stuff on it already, but it is Meta, and their record is not great with what they use data for or how securely they keep it. So depending what they're tracking from you, someone might now just know what your iris scanning is if you have a Vision Pro or one of the plugins or third-party add-ons that allows eye tracking. The Pico, again, it's just ByteDance, TikTok, and the government potentially getting your data, as well as the cross-border data, but cross-border data is also affected on the other 3 devices because they're all American-based. So for your, the data collected, you do have facial tracking, at least on the Pro, for the Meta Quest, which is used in things like, your social games, where you have mouth behavior so that it mimics as you're talking. That is data that they are collecting. Hopefully it's not having to leave the device, but you can't truly tell what Meta might be doing in the background with your data. And then, Pico has got add-ons that can allow it to do more tracking, but by default, only the it's the 3 Pro and 3 Enterprise, do eye tracking. The others do not. And then, yeah, so this is your biometric eye tracking here. You've got Vision Pro, their optic ID is very obviously scanning your eyes. It's got your eyes on the front of the device, so it's kind of easy to see that it's doing that. The Quest Pro is the only Quest that comes with eye tracking as a default in it. And then, what else have I got here? Yeah, the Pico currently doesn't have, apart from the high-end devices, and the Vive has got a third-party, the Tobii eye tracker, but I haven't really worked with that too much, so beyond it saying it's an eye tracker, I'm not too sure on that one. However, eye tracking has been used in lab studies to find people's passwords. Yep. So they can infer what you're looking at and what you are trying to type from the eye tracking. So either in an app, if it asks you to sign into something, it could then be trying to find out what your password is for whatever it is you're signing into, authenticate with Google, or for the Vision Pro, just out in the wild, they can kind of guess if you're typing on a keyboard. This was another study, which is just horrifying to think of how accurate that is and how quickly it can do that.
And from there on, it will actually identify you on any device that you put on.
And it gets faster the more you use devices.
Yeah. So, and it's the base of, so that data that leads to that is also the base of some of the identity theft, because at that point, I just want you to think about, if you haven't already, how, for instance, the Quest is connected with all the other accounts on your mobile. So in order to sign into the Quest, you have to have a Facebook account, which then means that it's connected to your Instagram account and your WhatsApp account, and the list goes on. And so now it's got the entire information on you or your users.
Yeah, so this is just some of the other general data they can get from you. Everyone knows voice data. Your phone's already doing that, so it's not a huge loss that you're now getting it tracked on your headset as well. They've got the hand tracking, which can be used to reveal potentially medical conditions if it's picking up a lot of shaking in your hand or where you're moving it, limited mobility. Body tracking is primarily the head on all devices, unless you've got the third-party add-ons, which strap around your chest, your legs, your arms to add in better tracking for whatever games you're playing. That's now data that they could also get access to. And then facial recognition with either scanning your face to make avatars or scanning your face to map onto avatars that are moving. The body tracking data for that previous point we had there with how accurately they can do that, that was a relatively small sample size of just like 500 people, and it got less accurate the more people. Less accurate was that 95%. At 100 people, it was like 98% accurate at figuring out who you were. But it's not using yet, from their study, any of the motion of how you're actually moving, so that would add even further accuracy. That's just you standing at idle during a loading screen. So pull JoJo poses so that it's different every time, possibly. Make it harder for them to realize what you're actually doing. And it's just picking up, your height, the rotation of your head, the rotation of your hands, and how far they are from your head. Which you wouldn't think is giving away more than you would like, but it allows them to identify you within 100 seconds at the slow end. And the more you play, the more data they gather, the faster that tends to get. Not hugely faster, but still, you're generally playing for longer than a minute, and if there's enough loading screens, they're going to figure out who you are.
Cool. So now we're talking about, these are the most recent breaches that have happened. We're going to have a look at one of them, which is the Inception attack. There's one in there, which is the GDPR fine, September 2024. That wasn't a VR breach. That's just in the list to show that Meta itself is not very good in securing confidential information. So they've only just recently, I say recently, 2024, they have been fined 1.8 billion New Zealand dollars. Yeah, billion with a B. And, but, as we all know, that is a minor issue for Meta because they make so much money, so they're probably going to keep doing what they're doing. So don't always count on the manufacturers being responsible with the data either. So then we're going to the inception attack, and I'm still trying to really, because I'm not a developer, trying to really get my head around how they did it, but they basically cloned the OS environment on the Apple Pro.
Yeah, they cloned the skinning of it, so as you exited whatever app you had previously been in, you now thought you were back at the main menu. It'd be similar to making a clone screen of a Windows desktop so that someone thinks they're back on their main desktop, and yeah, you can't tell, and you think in VR that you kind of just trust what you're seeing because it's around you and it just feels more trustworthy.
Yeah. So that's quite concerning, you know, that the spoofing of environments that you think you can trust is also part of that. Yeah, just do the next one. Cool. So then, so the compliance checklist, you know, so you obviously want to do, you know, check all of the data that you are collecting. You want to think about, do I need to collect it? Only collect what you really need. When we work with government, this is a big part of what we have to disclose. What data are we collecting? Is the user identifiable? But we actually only ever talk about what we are collecting. We don't inform them about what the manufacturer is doing or the manufacturer is collecting. And as I mentioned, you know, the 72-hour breach. And I guess, you know, yeah, it's the thing is that this is boring stuff, but it can save you a lawsuit, and it can save you, you know, growing gray hair and having sleepless nights. So it is important. Boring, but important.
Cool. So as just a kind of quick rundown of how to try and keep ahead of this and be aware of it, from the beginning of your project, do a bit of a risk assessment. What are you thinking of needing or collecting so that you can get ahead of that? Make sure you document it. Do some planning and training on your team so that you can make sure everyone knows how to treat whatever data you are collecting, and regularly go back and make sure that if your designers decide to update the game, that you know what new data you might be collecting for that, or that you're no longer having to collect. Typically, yeah, if you're sending this to AWS, Firebase, it is encoded and encrypted. When it's sent between those, they do that themselves. You might want to add more just because of the type of data this is. If someone gets in, you're in a lot of trouble, and people can't change their eyes. So if it does get stolen, it is permanent. You can't just change it like a password. Some of the larger studios that might be here have probably had to deal with this, probably have processes in place. If it's your first time, it's probably something to make sure you nail from the beginning so you're not running around at the end and, yeah, growing gray hair.
Before you go over, I'll actually add something to that. So I mentioned earlier on that, you know, I'm quite keen on doing an EEG game, but, you know, this is really important where you need to start to think about how much risk, how much appetite for risk does your studio have? Is it necessary? Is it the right market? It also comes with, if you're working with a client like we sometimes do, you have a responsibility to consult them appropriately and let them know around what data they should collect or can't collect or shouldn't collect, because they either breaching COPPA or they're breaching GDPR, and they might not care about GDPR in New Zealand, but we really should. Biometric data is still something that within the law is not protected enough. We are way behind GDPR. And the other thing is that when you're building a game, it is really important to add in controls for the user to understand what they are consenting to or giving them the option to opt out of. So that's actually what we see as ethical, especially if it is with, you know, vulnerable audiences.
Cool. So this is just a little bit of like implementation guide for the developer side a little bit there. For your encryption, TLS is generally the default for AWS Firebase, so it is encrypted in transport. You don't have to worry too much on that one. Your storage side, I don't know that end very well, so I'm not going to try and comment on that. Make sure your permissions are properly set up on device and for your game. Usually Facebook or Google or Apple are pretty good at making sure that your manifests actually show what you are collecting, and if you're collecting something that you aren't declaring on there, they will stop you from properly publishing your app. that has happened before. Unity ad network wasn't supposed to be there. Then there is, if you're not needing data, don't collect it. That's like the easiest step. You don't have to worry about what you don't collect, and then it's not your problem. But we are also kind of running a bit slow.
Yeah, that's right. So talking a little bit about insurance, so I mentioned earlier on that when we first started out and we looked at insurance, it was exuberant, and I was honestly questioning, whether we could pull this off. So to share a little bit with you, so because we do AR games and, and we're also releasing AR games in North America, our current insurance, we're insured with New Zealand, with Delta Insurance New Zealand. There was only one insurance company in the world that from our New Zealand broker was willing to take us on because of the risk that they perceived of what we were doing, given that we were doing geolocation AR. So that tells you something in itself, that the moment there is a massive issue and they have to settle claims, they have to settle court cases, the insurance goes up, the risk appetite goes down, insurance companies think twice about taking you on. So once the insurance companies will understand how risky some of the games are that are collecting health data using VR or XR or any app, for that matter, your premium goes up. So we pay at the moment around about $3,500 a month. And once we're adding in, XR games that collect more data, I'm expecting that our insurance will go up. It also depends on who your client is. If you are planning to do, say, a health game using an XR device, you do need to be aware of that. I urge you to declare it with the insurance company. If you play it down and you don't reveal everything, there is a chance that if a court case happens, they will actually not cover you. And then you've paid, not only have you paid all the money in for nothing, you're not going to be covered. The other thing I wanted to quickly mention is that if you are a founder of a company, I urge you also to get director insurance, because New Zealand law requires you as a director to do the right thing. And if the court feels that you didn't, or if something worse was to happen with one of your users, let's say, you weren't compliant on building your app for epilepsy sufferers, and so you weren't providing a warning, and so now you have somebody having an epileptic attack and they injure you, you could be seriously liable. So this is just, so you need to look at director insurance, you need to look at insurance for the game that you're building, the data that you're collecting, which country are you releasing in, and as a tip, if you don't have to release in North America, don't do it, it will bring your insurance down. Cool. So, and we're at the end. So let's just quickly kind of like do a summary. So, make sure that you document all the data collection processes. Make sure you've got everything. You only collect the data that you want. And you put in the any data stops or explaining to users what sort of data is being collected appropriately.
Yeah, if you can.
Yeah, if you can.
Depends on the device. They may not allow you the access to do that.
Yeah. And one of the other things that I wanted to mention, so from Europe, one of the big conversations that came out of it is how can we as developers be more responsible and come up with a data stop technique that we can implement into our apps. There were discussions about, is there a way to, for instance, stop the calls or interfere the calls from the manufacturer to collect the data as you're playing. There were all sorts of discussions as to how that could be done. If you're curious about what is being discussed and you want to have a look at the discussions, look up Data Stop VR headsets or Data Stop VR, and you will see that there's ongoing discussions where not only developers are concerned, but users are concerned. Generally, I'm hoping that maybe from this we can have a bit of a thought as to, what can we actually do as developers to be more responsible. And on that note, I actually wanted to end and hand over to some of you and hear if there are some ideas, are there any thoughts, are there any experiences within that space, and hear from the audience. Yeah, and otherwise, thank you very much. So, any thoughts, any ideas, any experiences anyone want to share? No one. Eerie silence. Oh dear. Okay. Did you find that helpful? Front row, they all know us. You have to say that. Okay. How many of you here are developers? Quite a few. Okay, so you probably knew most of it, but from a studio perspective, I hope that was useful. Okay, well, if there aren't any questions, last chance, then I'm going to release you into the break, and you can get ahead of everybody else. Oh yeah, it is 10. Cool. Thank you.